Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to click here on another video. And today we're going to be talking about the latest video game adaptation coming from Sony Pictures from one of their games from PlayStation, and that film is called Until Dawn. Directed by David F. Sandberg, this film stars people like Rubin, Michael Cimino, Odessa Azion, Ji Young Yu, and many more. And before we get too far into this video, if you guys are a fan of up-to-date reviews like this, as well as retrospective reviews, live streams, and even early reviews, then you're in the right place, and I'd like to ask you to consider subscribing. But if you're a returning viewer, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And today, like I already mentioned, we're talking about the latest video game adaptation, and that is for the game Until Dawn. Full transparency, I have played the game, and when I heard they were making an adaptation of this game, I was a little bit hit or miss on my feelings on it because it isn't really the kind of game that has a solidified narrative where you can really adapt it and bring it to the big screen in a cool cinematic way. There are so many games that I would absolutely kill to see them do on the big screen, specifically from the PlayStation exclusives, and Until Dawn was never really one of those because in a lot of ways most people would already see them as playable movies. Until Dawn is part of a genre that it was kind of part of helping popularize in the early 2010s. It started to kind of rear its head, I would say, in the late 2000s in general. But between games like Until Dawn, or games released by this studio, or games released by Telltale Games, the narrative-based kind of playable movie has become a staple in the world of video games. There's been so many, and Until Dawn was part of like an early kind of resurgence of this genre that really popularized it, where it wasn't just about being able to make narrative decisions that completely changed how the story played out, but most notably it took it to the next level by having it be hyper realistic in terms of its graphics and having popular actors in the roles within the game that you're familiar with. And over the course of the last decade or so, we've received a lot of these narrative based stories that have had a lot of times lesser known actors, but also some bigger name actors who have appeared in these games where you get to, again, control the decisions they make in this playable movie, essentially. So with that said, Until Dawn is not really a set story. The story is yours to kind of maneuver with, and the replay value of the game is being able to go through the game again and see what you can do differently. You can have an ending where everybody dies, or you can have an ending where nobody dies. You can have an ending that's completely different because specific characters died, and all of that is super dependent on your personal experience with the game. So how do you make that a movie? Well, we're going to get into what this film is all about. Then we'll get into my thoughts, and then I'm going to pose some questions to you guys about whether or not this game needed to be a movie. Until Dawn focuses on a group of young individuals who are on a trip out in the middle of the woods, specifically because the main character Clover, played by Rubin, is on a hunt to kind of learn some more about her missing sister who went missing in this area a year prior. And of course, after they arrive there, they end up meeting a creepy individual who tells them that people have gone missing in a nearby area. They end up finding a cabin in the woods and end up finding themselves in a Groundhog Day-like time loop where every night they find themselves in some sort of horror story that leads to their death, and every time they die they start right back where they started in this cabin, and they must now work together to try to survive until dawn in order to break the time loop and escape this horror situation. That's the base premise of the film without getting into any spoilers. And what I can say about this film immediately in terms of filmmaking is that it's very well made. David F. Sandberg is the director here, who of course in the world of horror has done things like Lights Out, as well as my favorite of the three Annabelle films, which is Annabelle Creation, which may not be a high bar for many to cross, but I do think he does a really great job in the director's chair as a horror director. I think he's able to bring something stylistically, and for the most part is good at shooting pretty eerie, creepy sequences. He's also really good at jump scares, which I will say right out of the gate, this film is loaded with. This is a jump scare galore film, so if you're not into jump scares that very much rely on big, loud music and something jumping at the camera, then you're probably not going to love this film. But all I could think while I was watching this, and the fact that it was produced by Blumhouse as well, is that this is likely a film that will be put into Halloween Horror Nights soon enough. I can only imagine that this is going to be a house at Halloween Horror Nights in the coming year or the next year after that. With all that said, it's tough, again, like I already mentioned, because when you play the Until Dawn video game, there isn't really this element about it that has a solidified story. Everybody's experience and everybody's outcome is so different, and while of course you might have an outcome that was similar to somebody else because everybody's making similar decisions at a certain point, it really isn't about a solidified story. So how do you make a story that's satisfying that also feels like it honors the game? What I will say in terms of honoring the game is that the film is littered with tons of visual references and Easter eggs and nods, and most notably one character, which is the character of Dr. Hill, played by Stormare, who is actually a character that's in the the Until Dawn video game as well. He is the only actor that has reprised from that video game though, so for the most part this film kind of stands on its own as its own story. And so I do think it's important going into this, if you are a fan of the Until Dawn video game and you're hoping for an adaptation that's faithful to that game that you enjoy, what you got here more is a story and a movie that takes place within the world of Until Dawn and does its part to kind of showcase how it's connected to the overarching world without it necessarily being an adaptation specifically of the game. And so I do think it's going to beg the question for a lot of people. Is this something that just feels like it's being tacked on to a popular IP name so people will go see it, but it's just another horror film? Or is it something that really honors the legacy and kind of feels like it should be called Until Dawn? I'm kind of torn on that, I won't lie, because while I found this to be a very well made film in terms of cinematography, the blood, the guts, the gore, the overall practical effects of the film I thought were pretty top notch. This is a really good looking film in a lot of ways, and you have pretty great performances from all of our cast members here, most notably our main star, Rubin. I thought that outside of all those elements, this film is a pretty conventional, straightforward horror film, and in a lot of ways, for me, outside of having Dr. Hill as a recurring character here, I didn't really feel like this film did anything that really felt like Until Dawn. I enjoyed the film though. I want to kind of clear that up as well. Like, I'm not negative on the film. I didn't think it was an exceptional film, but I didn't think it was a terrible film by any means. I found the film to be enjoyable and interesting, and while the film is filled with tons of horror cliches and tropes, and it's filled with tons of jump scares, it is a film that I think is interesting to watch. There was an engaging element to it. I think the fact that it has that Groundhog Day type time loop kind of thing definitely gives it its own identity within the world of horror. While we have seen that in horror before, for sure, it definitely, you know, does something to kind of give it its own identity. And the fact that they kind of have a new experience every time they die and have to deal with the night definitely led to each horror night being a little bit more interesting than the last. With that said though, as the movie was playing out and we got to the third act and we got specifically to the last like 10 or 15 minutes, it just, by the end, felt like a conventional, straightforward horror film. It's not a bad movie, it's not an incredible movie, it's not a great movie, but it was fun. It was an enjoyable time. I think this is the kind of film that many will enjoy kind of throwing on around the Halloween season. I think this is the kind of film that many people will likely enjoy just kind of going to see with some friends, especially if you have friends who are easily scared, especially around jump scares. But I do think that seasoned horror fans may go into this film and walk out and think, yeah, that was just all right. That was just a fun enough time. It was a nice way to pass the time. It was well made, it was well acted, it had all the good practical effects that I like to see, it was filled with guts and gore and all that kind of stuff, but it wasn't anything that, you know, kind of left me in a place where I'm gonna lose sleep tonight, you know. And that's really all I can say on Until Dawn. It's a completely safe horror film that is conventional in so many ways, but has enough unique energy within it because of that Groundhog Day time loop element that gives it its own a little bit of zest. There's a little sprinkling of seasoning in the style here that gives it its own identity. But I don't necessarily know that I would say, yeah, that identity really saves it from being, in a lot of ways, just a pretty straightforward trope-driven horror film. So, as you can see, I'm a little bit torn on certain elements, but I do really want to highlight the fact that I think that David F. Sandberg knows how to direct horror in terms of the visuals, in terms of the style. I think that the cast here is really strong, and Ella Rubin, I think, has some really great Scream Queen moments in this film. I think she's a great kind of lead actress in this film, and I can definitely see her being a bigger actress moving forward. She was able to bring some nuance to her role, and she definitely had, like I mentioned before, a really good scream to make her possibly a new modern day Scream Queen if we see her pop up in more horror films. But yeah, for the most part, I think this is a very competently solid film that was entertaining, but by the time the movie was over, all I could think was, I likely won't watch this film again anytime soon. I'll probably throw it on maybe again one day down the line on Halloween just to kind of see how I feel about it again. But it's by no means a terrible film, and I think it's a film many people will enjoy. It's just not one I can necessarily see being in my list of favorites or memorable films by the time we get to the end of 2025. So that's going to be my thoughts on Until Dawn, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Do you think that this film should have been an adaptation of Until Dawn? Do you think it should have just had its own name? Do you think its connections and Easter eggs and references do enough to make it an Until Dawn story, or are you just kind of turned off by this film altogether? Whether you liked the film or didn't like the film, I look forward to hearing any and all opinions down below, so leave those comments down below, hit that like button, subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.